What was the most uncomfortable / awkward moment you ever experienced playing Dungeons and Dragons? Though, he finally finished his character, an arcane archer. Nate shoehorned him into the story by having us stumble upon him in the dungeon we were in. He was finally going to get to play with us. We left the room we found him in and proceeded to the next area. We open a door and are immediately faced with a beholder. It uses its finger of death eye on a random party member, which happens to be Joey. Joey rolls a 3 on his saving throw. Joey dies within 2 minutes of playing, having done nothing but fail to roll a fort save. Now, all of us are thinking, Nate, for the love of God, just make something up that allows him to still be alive. Unfortunately, Nate isn't physic, and as I said before, he is very by the book. Joey is dead, and must roll a new character. It was so unbelievably awkward and painful. We still regret and talk about the mistake of not forcing Nate to let Joey live over. 10 years later. The rules exist to help people have fun, not to destroy it. So back in high school we had ourselves a D&D club. It consisted of myself and 5 friends. My senior year we had a new kid join us who I'm going to call Nate. Nate was a very smart, very nerdy kid who was used to doing things mostly by the book. He had a campaign he wanted to DM, and our normal DM was happy to let him. Very early on in the campaign another kid asked to join who I am going to call Joey. Joey was not very bright. I don't know if he actually had any mental disability, but it just took him forever to get shit done. He began to roll up a character, but because he was frequently late, absent, and super slow, it took him probably a dozen sessions to finish. He had to change things constantly because we would be higher level, or he didn't write it down, or he lost his sheet. Every single step of character creation required one of us to basically do it for him. Eventually, played one session with a bunch of people who had never played before. Most of them were cool, but one guy who was playing a wizard discovered that some low-level spell he had, prestidigitation, allowed him to clean or soil objects up to a certain size. He spent the rest of the session trying to soil everyone and everything we encountered. It was funny the first couple times, but it got annoying really fast. Those kind of in-jokes can be so good in a long-term campaign. We had a bard/ranger who pretty much only knew mend as his spell. So at least once or twice per session someone would rip/burn their clothes in a fight, and he would pipe up excitedly, "I cast mend." Lots of fun when it happens a couple times per session. Not fun 20 times in one session. And hurt at how he called her out. So the rest of us started calling out the cheating we had seen that session. "Oh, you mean like the time last round where you rolled until you had a 97 and just pointed to it? Didn't you just get Firebolt? How could you have so many points in it? Did you just erase the ones from Waterbolt and transfer them over? You know that isn't in the rules, right? It's funny, I don't remember you looting that magical staff with all those bonuses. DM, can you check to see if that's really what the worm had last session?" The game got a lot quieter in some portions of the table after that. Based system, it was D100, so you'd roll 2 10-sided dice for just about everything. The DM's girlfriend, now wife, had joined for the first time. She was a very nice person, bubbly and funny. She mostly understood the rules and played along. I noticed early on that when it was her turn, she'd roll her 2 10-sided dice, and whichever one was higher was the 10-sided dice for that roll and the rest of the rolls that round. And next round she'd repeat the process, often causing the 10s and 1s dice to change between rounds. Small-time cheating, but I was used to so much worse and she was being moderately discreet about it. And then the cheater called her out. He pointed out she was ensuring she always got the highest roll to start her round and it wasn't fair the DM was letting her cheat like that just because she was his girlfriend. She looked a little shocked at being caught. I had this one player who would cheat all the damn time. He would pre-roll dice until he got the number he wanted and just point at it after moving his hand like he had just rolled when his turn was up. He refused to roll up characters in front of everyone because anyone watching was bad luck. He'd constantly change his mind and switch around things on the character several sessions in because he thought the guy wasn't min-maxed enough. He insisted on keeping his character sheet between sessions, and the character would mysteriously get stronger between every session. And that's ignoring common things like using information he couldn't possibly have, by buying the module we were playing through and memorizing it. Things like that. The time in question was a session we were playing in a different system, Middle-earth role-playing, or some similar name. It wasn't a D20. The Rape Dwarf. I'll expand on this, but I warn you that I tend to be pretty wordy. Okay, so this was my first session of D&D. It's probably relevant that I was the only woman at the table, playing the only female character, a human rogue. Due to plot reasons, we ended up taking a job to clear a mine of monsters. It became apparent that this wasn't going to go well when the dwarf, who'd been quiet up to this point, started describing his combat actions with a little more relish than was necessary. We ran into a small group of goblin children fleeing from us and the dwarf announced that he was going to murder them all and rape their corpses, I think. It was a while ago, rape was involved. The paladin took issue with this and managed to hold him back, allowing the children to escape. Dwarf was not happy. We proceeded to the lower levels of the mine, where it turned out that there was a group of giant spiders and naturally I managed to roll a critical one, getting stuck in some webbing. The dwarf's player looked me dead in the eye and announced I rape her. Immediate silence followed. No one seemed to quite know what to say to this. The DM was the first to speak, saying, "Right, I'm going to say the last 5 minutes never happened." Everyone agreed that this was probably the best thing to do. The dwarf didn't like this and after a few protests that he was just role-playing his character sulkied in the corner for the rest of the session. I don't think he ever came back. Sure was an interesting first session. I still like D&D though. Specifically because my character wasn't having sex with her. The DM's logic was that, my character was a pretty good-looking guy, spending time with her and being nice. It was literal torture that my character wasn't fucking her too. The campaign overall was good, and the DM was usually pretty great. But there was definitely that one time that I got penalized for not raping someone. Devil hadn't done anything wrong. This routine went on for a session or two. Out of character, I had been following the rules for redemption pretty closely to how they're printed in the Book of Exalted Deeds. My character also had the leadership feat but no cohort. This feat allows you to essentially take a sidekick character, the cohort, if the plot allowed it. An Irene's sidekick would have been pretty sweet. I don't think my dude was high enough level have taken her as a cohort yet, but I was thinking that as my character leveled up and some time went by, he could have potentially built a rapport with her, possibly leading to redemption. If nothing else, it seemed like a decent enough plot to follow. Then my alignment started taking hits. I kind of expected this, I mean my character did kidnap someone, even if there were extenuating circumstances. But I learned that it was way. When it finally became time to start the ritual, my character told her to run off and get to safety, or get ready for a fight. As it turns out, The Erinyes failed to get away, and was transported to the strange plane with us. Worse, she overheard us talking about our mission, so we couldn't let her go, because then she could have warned her devil bosses and they may try to stop us. Or take the MacGuffin for themselves. Without many options, my character took her prisoner. He kept her bound, and I specified to make it as comfortable as I could. I also began to make diplomacy checks to both win her trust, admittedly a tall order, and to potentially redeem her, possibly even more difficult. My character made sure she had enough food, water, etc., and even though she was captured, my neutral good cleric tried to at least be as humane as he could. The Erinyes, other than being a... oh man. So it was a game of 3.5. I was playing a level 12-ish cleric of Pella. Very good aligned, and decently charismatic. For plot reasons we were sneaking into the Nine Hells to summon a colossal demon made of pure hunger. I'm not certain why we had to go to hell to do that, but this campaign was a few years ago now. After being summoned, the hunger demon would go a rampage, and over the course of a few days devour the countryside. Our goal was to get eaten by the demon. Inside its mouth was a portal to another dimension, where some secret of the plot was located. So far this all sounds like a pretty fun adventure. It only got weird because we had hired on a devil guide to take us around hell and to get the supplies we needed. It was an Erinyes, which is like a typically female fallen angel sort of monster. She was polite enough though and very helpful in a professional sort of. Happened last week. Someone got upset after asking them to mute their mic while eating and stormed out, derailing the session. Edit: a bunch of people asked me how to get started. Roll20 is a site where you can join games, some for free, in a wide variety of RPGs including D&D, Pathfinder, Call of Cthulhu, and pretty much every other major RPG. There are tons of games willing to accept new players, but you may need to do trial and error to find a good group. Alternatively, there are sponsored weekly events at game stores called Adventurers League, which are campaigns that you can drop in and drop out of with pre-made character sheets. You can read more about that here. http://dnd.wizards.com/play-events/organized-play. Edit 2. Another good place to start if you want to play with your group of friends is the starter set. It includes a shortened rule book, DM guide, dice, pre-made characters, and an adventure that I've heard is pretty good. I saw a dude in his mid-20s cry and storm out of the room because his character got killed because he was doing something stupid, and he did get some shitty rolls, like a full-on child hissy fit over a D&D character death. He never wanted to play after that. Some girl we were playing with insisted on having her character get raped by one of the enemies, very uncomfortable. In one of our games, 2 PCs attempted to rape a third PC. I say attempted, honestly they might have succeeded. I didn't bother to pay attention after a while. The third player was visibly uncomfortable with this, as was everyone else except the 2 players and the DM, who wouldn't stop the scene on account of they are just role-playing, even though we literally begged him to. Never played with either the 2 players or the DM again. Powerful artifact from theft. They weren't too pleased to find a rogue attached to their idol, and they responded appropriately. The fellow didn't actually die, but he did spend the rest of the campaign with 1 fewer appendage. Since he'd also made it very clear to everyone that the body part in question was the source of his skills, he wound up impotent. And in more ways than one. TLDR, sexy statues solicit severe suffering. Ah, you met that player. There's a particular type of player that every dungeon master encounters at some point. He's a loud, talkative individual, and his constant attempts at jokes are made all the more annoying by his subtle, but still evident, social awkwardness. This fellow will always play as either a rogue, a sorcerer, or a bard, usually with a focus on employing his charisma, and whenever possible, he'll do his best to make the story center on him and his exploits. His sexual exploits, that is. For a brief period in college, I was the dungeon master for a group that included that player. The campaign was one of my own devising, having to do with a world-ending cataclysm that some other band of adventurers, non-player characters, was intent on stopping. My group's party, on the other hand, had taken it upon themselves to raid the sprawling fortress where the aforementioned apocalypse had first been prophesied, convinced as they were that a monumentally powerful artifact had been hidden in the catacombs beneath it. I may be a bit biased, but I personally thought that it was a pretty good setting. Although it might have been a bit better if that player hadn't tried to seduce every female he encountered. See, the fortress in question was the size of a small city, and it had a number of factions dwelling within it. Some of those sects were only too happy to offer aid and assistance, while others viewed the player characters for what they were. They were a group of greedy marauders. Basically, every single time someone started interacting with a woman, though, the fellow in question would interject with his allegedly comedic attempts at charm. That area is closed to outsiders, a female NPC might say, but if you can get into the sewer system, you might. I'd like to get into her sewer system. That player would interrupt. She digs me. I can tell. You get the idea. This went on for far, far longer than I should have allowed, but I'd been planning to punish the guy at the campaign's midpoint. When the party finally found their way to the artifact, they discovered that it wasn't an item or a weapon, it was a living statue of a young woman. Needless to say, that player immediately tried to bed the sculpture. And this time, against all odds, she, or it, I suppose, was receptive to his advances. Of course, I made it look like the fellow had just beaten out my dice rolls, but he didn't really care, all that mattered to him was that he'd gotten some. As he discovered a moment or two later, though, he'd also gotten stuck. It was about then that reinforcements arrived, intent on protecting their monumentally. My DM is a bit loose on taking suggestions on things that don't impact the campaign but make us roleplay. My dwarf was attacking some random bandit, and he had to move under a beam and hit the bandit with his hammer. I rolled a 1. The DM said I ran under the beam but raised my hammer too early, hitting the beam and falling prone, to which the cleric replied and he pooped his pants. That was only the first time my dwarf shat himself. Once a buddy of mine set me up on a date with a girl he knew. We hit it off and started dating. Turns out the buddy didn't expect us to hit it off, he was just trying to ice her a bit while he was off dating someone else. When he found out we were actually dating, he flipped out. He was my DM. The next session he tried to kill my character, AD&D 2nd Ed, level 8 fighter. The other players wouldn't have it. It turned into a weird shouting match about betrayal and douchebaggery. If you check the top of our /RPR stories, it's apparently common. Common was a poor word choice, for players to try to rape other players in-game, particularly with female players being the victim. Also common, the DM trying to get female players raped by orcs or some other nonsense. One particular story was really upsetting, as the girl in question had been raped before, so she really wasn't okay with it. She ended up leaving and everyone was pissed at the GM, appropriately. If you're a GM and you try to incorporate rape into your game without the meta consent of the players, you're a fucking scumbag. Edit, I would like to say that, though it happens, it's not a thing I've ever run into and you shouldn't let it discourage you from trying D&D. I've only ever had fun, and wonderful experiences, personally. Honest. TLDR, closeted Christian creepily characterizes carnal compulsions. The rejection, then he'd stop talking and sulk, and his silent tantrum would culminate with an unprompted preaching session. See, while none of us ever got confirmation of this, everyone's assumption was that the fellow was gay. And suffice to say that his sexuality didn't play well with his religion. His family was part of a particularly weird sect that viewed just about everything as either blasphemous or worthy of shame. I'm not sure why Dungeons and Dragons was acceptable, but my guess is that it was one of his only outlets, so he made an exception. But unfortunately for the rest of us, that meant our inclusion in his role-playing was always bordering on uncomfortable. None of us wanted to make him feel unwanted or unsafe, but at the same time, we weren't too pleased by the prospect of making out to make sure we got it right. We also got pretty sick of the sermons, if I'm. Years and years ago, during my first ever exposure to Dungeons and Dragons, I was part of a group that included a somewhat confused young man. He was right on the cusp of puberty, as we all were, at the time, and his burgeoning urges would very frequently influence his role-playing. That probably doesn't sound too surprising. Many players bring their darker desires to light during the game, but this particular fellow took things to an extreme. For one thing, the guy in question had opted to play a tall, buxom woman with a penchant for seducing the other players' characters. That was a little bit annoying on its own, and it was exacerbated by the fact that he'd often insist on acting out what his own avatar was doing, to make sure we got it, he'd claim. Worst of all, though, was how he would respond whenever his advances were spurned. First he'd seem to be personally offended by whenever someone just disobeys the rules they agreed to. It's so awkward to have that conversation. I used to DM, and one of my stipulations was no evil player characters. I've just seen it lead to too much in-character fighting in the past, and in-character fighting usually leads to real-life arguing, so nope. Just a rule I have when I DM. One guy agreed. Then made the most evil neutral character I've ever seen. Sorry, but disguising yourself as someone, then cutting her face off while she's still alive so you can assume her identity is evil. I don't care what it says on your character sheet, Evan. There were a lot of other evil things he did, torture, unprovoked murder of innocents, etc., but this is where the rest of the party finally turned on him. He fought it for a while, but eventually he brought a new character the next session. Their mouths would have any impregnation fetishist coming in their pants. We however could only stare at each other. Finally the DM's girlfriend, who remember is hotter than the freaking sun, just blurts out, "Do we just leave because they are going to be fucking for a while?" And worse, we had to creep out because the room we are playing in is right next to their bedroom. Yes. I have won. When I was in the Navy I played with a group that mostly consisted of me and 3 other couples. The DM was engaged to this insanely hot Swedish national whose rather well-fitting clothes were distraction enough, but no, it was our dwarf warrior and our halfling illusionist who are the subject of this story. Well, we had been playing together at this point for about a year and we all knew they were trying to get pregnant. What we didn't expect was that during one pretty intense session, she's constantly checking her watch like she has to be somewhere, finally leans over and whispers to her husband, and they make some half-assed character conference excuse and duck out of the room. Now, this session also happened to be at their house. Not 5 fucking minutes later, we hear them. They are not quiet people by no means, and the words that were coming out of I played while stationed on a ship, and because the group was co-ed we had to host the games in the mess decks. There was a guy working the mess decks who had a huge crush on me, and was a super fundamental Christian. One day, when I got up to go to the bathroom in the middle of a game, he stopped me on my way back, grabbed my hand, and prayed for my soul because I was playing a devil's game. I yanked my hand back and said I appreciate the concern but never ever do that again, and I walked away. Thankfully, he didn't try it again and was only on TAD, temporary assigned duty that every new sailor must complete, so he was sent back to his division a month later and I didn't see him again. This was more than 15 years ago. Climbing up the inside of a large grain silo at night, torches in hand, we ascended towards the treasure we thought was at the top. All of a sudden a noise. I draw both of my swords, a player exclaims. Are you sure? The DM confirms. With a subtle nod from the player suddenly the DM gets an excited look in his eye. Everyone roll a luck check. And I mean everyone. A cry of surprise goes around the table. Wait, why? We all exclaim, nearly in unison. Danver drew his swords. Yeah, and? Danver was holding a torch. If he draws his swords I have to assume that he dropped his torch, in the silo, full of very dry grain. It is now a roaring fire. Only one of us survived. A DM took a comedic moment too far and basically turned an entire adventure into a send-up of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. A mysterious alchemist character who was supposed to be a recurring villain practically turned into Dr. Frank-N-Furter. Jokes naturally creep into a campaign, but I've always felt when you start writing them in that it can be too much. Months later when that group had fizzled, I had an opportunity to view the DM's notes. And what that adventure could have been before the jokes was something awesome. I DM'd for a group where one of the girls was convinced the entire game was for her enjoyment. She would throw fits when the rest of the party didn't want to do what she did and constantly tried to split up from them. It eventually culminated in a very awkward temper tantrum when she refused to go with her party, and ended up dying alone. Everything we can to cure him, but his onslaught is relentless. We ended the game with him bound and gagged, returning him to the wife and saying he needs mental help after the trauma he endured. The wife thanks us and pays us. Us roommates are looking at each other like, WTF just happened here. This is the module that this dude read and thought fuck yeah. That's what I'm running for brand new people I have never met before. It'll be awesome. Huge mansion house rented full of gamer roommates. None of us felt like running and we all wanted to play together. So, we had a new GM over that we found on a meetup type site. The first campaign he runs for us is a pre-written module out of a very old Dragon magazine. The plot is that a husband has gone missing and the wife hires adventurers to find him. Seems harmless. We go into the basement and there's a rough-hewn tunnel bored into it. Adventure into the tunnel. Kill rats. Kill bigger rats. Kill things that look like half rat half human monsters. We think we're rats, so. Okay. Get to a den where holy fuck the husband is aggressively being fuckridden by a giant rat mother. In the act of it ! 1 ! 1. Horrified, we kill the rat mother sex beast. We try to figure out if the husband is okay. He's furious we slew his rat paramour and attacks as if under a spell. We try. Dude with my body, chunky, with long blonde hair proceeded to unbutton his shirt, go in front of the fan and made a Batman pose with his shirt as the cape coating the entire room in the smell of his BO. I've been trying to weasel my way out of going back ever since. And scripted. She took his hand ceremoniously and led him into our crappy shelter mere meters from us and the light of the fire. What followed still makes me ambivalent. All of us were virgins. We were envious and disgusted at the same time. They spoke Elvish, we saw most of it and it went quick. As we were sitting so close we couldn't really talk about it without them hearing, so we shared the moment in silence. Since then we had talked about it for hours. We went to bed outside as no one wanted to be the first to enter the shelter. In the morning we boys got killed by the orcs. The girl got captured. We went home early and no one ever tried LARPing again. The girl kept LARPing with the orcs. Fabian was pissed but never admitted it. In fact, he repeatedly said that they didn't have sex and that it all was an act. But what we saw through those stick walls, I will never forget. A friend lost his virginity while LARPing, in character. That was awkward. Edit, okay, so this is how it went down. It was 21 or 22 years ago and me and my group of friends were around 17 years old. LARPing was very new and almost unheard of in my country. We had been playing D&D for some time though, but not seriously. He group wasn't really a group of best friends, more like a diverse collection of kids that happened to like RPGs. Small town, you couldn't really pick and choose. Since the one of the guys have become a very close friend. There was this kid named Fabian, who I didn't really know at the time. He had been to some kind of indoor vampire LARP event previously and talked four of us into trying LARPing. First weekend after the summer vacation there was this big fantasy LARP close to us. So we were 5 teenage boys plus one girl Fabian had met on that vampire evening. She was older than us, not much, maybe 2 or 3 years, but at that age it's a big difference. Typical nerdy girl. Very confident towards us younger guys but probably a bit shy and awkward towards most other people. Not very nice at all. Average looking. In hindsight I think the reason Fabian was so persuasive about us going there was to get this girl. The rest of us hadn't met her before the weekend, just heard Fabian bragging about making out with her, in character, as vampires I presume. Being nerdy teenagers this was big news even though we tried to act unimpressed. Us, 6, formed an Elvish Ranger band. We all put some hours into making costumes, but we still looked really bad. I don't think we passed as elves. The weekend came and the autumn had come early and the weather was cold. We got off to a late start Friday night, lots of rules to be explained and so on. The organizers seems happy we were there even though we looked like contemporary hobos. I remember an orcish band with insanely ambitious costumes. We didn't talk much to the other players beforehand. Instead we walked as quick as possible to our campsite and make some kind of shelter in the falling light. I struggled to stay in character and a couple of us never really got in character in the first place. Fabian and the girl was speaking some make-up Elvish and seemed a bit annoyed. We made a bonfire and sat around it trying to make conversation. Every time some said something out of character the girl would shut us up, which only created long periods of silence. No alcohol either, as that was strictly forbidden. In my country alcohol is a necessary social lubricant. Pretty soon he girl made up some story about heritage and bloodlines and how she had to mate with Fabian. It all seemed rehearsed. Side note, one of the guys, not Fabian, is now a very famous artist. At the time there was the youngest of us, 15 I think, and seemed a bit upset about the whole thing. I will never say his name. My good friend decided he wanted to do a sandbox campaign of his own making. We have the first session at my house, and one of the guys that showed up was a friend of a friend that neither of us really knew well. The session gets started and already I am getting a buddy fuck vibe from this guy. He's messing with other people's gear when they are asleep, calling out false alarms while on watch, and generally being a prick. One of the storylines involved investigating a murder. We arrive at the murder scene, and there is a charred corpse. We ask some questions and the group wants to leave. I pick an obvious action of investigating and searching the corpse. Amongst some clues, I find a +1 ring of defense. Being an unarmored monk, I keep it. Buddy fucker wants to roll for it. No. We wouldn't have even found the ring if I hadn't decided to search the corpse, and it's an item I can put to use. Sorry, I know your wizard could also find it useful, but it's my find, and it's not like I found a magical double-headed battle axe and decided to keep it and not give it to the barbarian. So night comes and I pass a note to the DM that I am not sleeping during Buddy Fucker's watch, but will feign sleep. Sure enough, during his watch he tries to steal the ring off me. I'm starting to get pissed at this point, so I put the ring in my prison wallet. The DM is getting amused and rules that since the ring is still technically equipped while in my keister, I still get the bonus. Buddy Fucker is incensed. We make it back to town during a festival. We participated in some events, and during which jokingly I made a pass at a lusty barmaid. Buddy Fucker uses a glamour spell to make him appear later as the same barmaid and ask me to join him in the pantry. At this point, things are getting out of hand for a fun-filled D&D game as the glamoured wizard/barmaid falls to his/her knees and begins to go down on me. During a perception check I feel fingers roaming towards my butthole and realize it's the fucking wizard trying to get that fucking ring. So I stunning fisted him, and he burning hands me and crits. He takes me to 0 horsepower, takes he fucking ring and leaves me to bleed out in the pantry. Didn't tell the party, they later find the body and lo and behold, Buddy Fucker has a shiny new ring on. So the party murdered him, and buried me with the ring. That was the only session of that game. Nobody wanted to play after that, and we never invited Buddy Fucker back from then on. We have played many other sessions, but none stand out as that disturbing and weird. A player was being a dick to my wife who was new to playing. It wasn't like just him and her character not being compatible. He was outwardly doing and saying little things to piss her off to where she didn't wanna play anymore. I forget what it was, but he said something and I, the DM, blew the fuck up at him. Most everyone else was outside smoking, but they heard and were like, WTF was that about? Cue much silence and uncomfortableness. Oddly enough, he stopped and they're cool as shit now. So, yelling works sometimes. That we stopped playing D&D the rest of the time I was there. So I was in Medhold in the Air Force basic training. We pretty much can't do anything, but we can play D&D, and a bunch of people loved it. One dude wanted to be a DM and did like 2 sessions of it. About the DM, he was cool at first. Then, we all realized he's a lying fucktard after a while. He always shouts everything, which is not good because the airmen in Medhold snitch on trainees a bunch for stupid stuff. He skipped like a good chunk of the beginning story, so we literally have a terribly vague idea of what's going on. He also stutters, which I don't have a problem with, but with him it was just so goddamn annoying. The DM kills off a party member instantly because he misunderstood what person said, which is understandable, but the way he did it was obnoxious. He also forced us to fight a Cambion at like level 3 or 5. The way he did was just not natural or smooth, and it felt forceful. with goons to keep them occupied while we did the rest. And it was a campaign where we all wound up ludicrously strong because we were collecting stones with literal gods in them. It's just that I don't feel the Char's player did a great job handling her weaknesses. Was always a little annoying to see our rogue pull off a really well done stealth maneuver only to have it made largely irrelevant by massive numbers McGee. As a final word, to the person asking how she had her stats arranged, I have no idea, can't say I ever looked at her char sheet. I joined midway through the campaign so I could easily be overlooking some transformation that made them stronger, but it always felt a little overblown to me. We had a min/maxer in this group, and the DM was way too nice to her. Meant our encounters had to all be a large group at the very least so we could all participate. We did a lot of army fighting. I still remember the supposed big bad and his two main henchmen coming out to fight us, and she killed two of them in a single turn. Fortunately the guy wasn't really the big bad, was a red herring, but, I'm all for playing how you want to play, but when you go so far that your lowest roll outside of a critical fail is 18 because you min/maxed that hard, you're missing out on half the entertainment value in my opinion. Case in point, that same campaign my gnome illusionist failed my intimidation roll horribly when I made a fake dragon to scare off a real one, but it failed its perception check and its will save and wound up falling in love with the, very incorporeal, illusion, so. Still had fun. Edit, didn't expect this to blow up so much. Rather than respond individually, please know I do not see a problem with min/maxing a character. My own character that game was spec'd hard for illusion magic and not much else. The difference between a good min/max and a bad min/max for me is how you handle the min side of it. In her case we got slightly obnoxious chaotic evil out of her, in that we had to restrain her sometimes way, in exchange for being ludicrously overpowered. In my case I had the hit points of an incredibly dry small stick and was suitably a coward. The number of times I'd blow almost all of my minor illusions for the day by hiding myself, that wanted to help but wouldn't put myself in anything resembling danger if I could help it. I do give credit to the DM for handling it well. Ramp up the scale of the encounter and surround the min/maxer. This light-hearted simple dungeon. Day of the game comes around. The party meets in the tavern, and a little kid busts in crying that their solstice celebration stuff is missing. Party basically responds, "Sucks to be you kid, let's get drunk." Drinking started up in real life. Players basically didn't give a damn about playing the game and kept saying they were trying to seduce people or do dumb stuff until I just gave up. I spent a lot of effort trying to do this fun little thing, and the group took a collective dump on it. It really bothered me at the time, and I basically gave up on D&D after that. Also was the last time some of those friends were invited to something I did. The last time I played D&D was Christmas of 2006 IRC. My old group hadn't played in a while. Life had gone on. People had gotten jobs, got married, had kids. None of us were in that place anymore where we could spend entire weekends having marathon RPG sessions like the old days. I decided it'd be fun to run a one-shot game. I came up with the idea to tell a simple story. It was more or less The Grinch Stole Christmas, but the Grinch was a band of goblins. I had prepared a cool little dungeon crawl. NPCs with clues. It was just a neat little module meant to take a few hours to complete. I then went online to Chessex, and ordered a customized set of red and green dice for every player who came. The D6 said Merry Christmas 2006 with a little Christmas tree in it. Everyone was invited, including SOs who were new to the group. I wanted everyone to have fun. It was just going to be. I was playing a male elf cleric, were healers, and we were fighting a succubus. The DM said she was going to use a seduction spell on the party and we had to roll fort, something like that. Trying to keep it short, I asked that, since my male elf was gay, if he gets any bonuses against seduction from a female. Apparently the DM, who was a friend of my friend who invited me, was a giant homophobe, as the rest of the fight was the succubus pulling out a giant dildo and using it on my trapped cleric as the rest of the team fought. I have not played a game with him since. One of my buddies attempted to rape a goblin. As DM I let him get up to the point where he attempted to enter. I had him roll a d20 and he ended up rolling a 1, so he promptly broke his dick in half on the goblin's tailbone. That'll teach him to commit war crimes. You encounter a female dire wyvern on the trail. What do I need on this roll to have sex with the dire wyvern? Trying to seduce inanimate objects is a little less creepy than trying to seduce monsters/NPCs/players, at least. Admittedly, I did this once. We were all frustrated about getting this particular door to open. We kept failing due to an unending chain of bad rolls. Eventually I ended up trying to seduce it open as a joke to vent frustration. It worked, of course. We all had a good laugh. I changed his name from Hogarth to Dwayne the Door fucking Dwarf. Lol, my party had that player the first time he did it. The players were at a wizarding college. The implication was that it was a community college. Long story short, there was a sexual assault tribunal, and he's no longer allowed within 300 feet of an academic institution. I was the DM and one player was playing as a barbarian, and he decided to try to intimidate some goblins and rolled a nat 1. So instead of intimidating them, I decided he seduced them. I and the others had a great laugh, but he was having none of it and slaughtered them. We then made him feel bad for killing the loves of his life. Maybe not exactly what you were going for, but it was fun. My DM was an asshole. I rolled a 1 on my character, giving her dad a back massage. It caused him a spontaneous orgasm. She had to leave town and he had to deal with his wife making fun of him for a year. She was my character's stepmom. I'm married to my DM now. I forgot about this until now. Thanks Op, you ruined my marriage by reminding me. I was playing at a small con put on by the university, and the DM brought his young teenage daughter to play with us. Which is perfectly fine, start him young. However, 2 of the older gentlemen, 40s, were insistent on talking about getting drunk and soliciting prostitutes at the inn and make all sorts of jokes that made me uncomfortable as a woman in her early 20s. I felt so bad for the DM, but too uncomfortable socially to call out 2 grown men for being gross. Playing Numenera, a role-playing game similar to D&D but taking place in the far distant future, where ancient tech is considered magic and there's all sorts of incomprehensible shit lying in trash heaps or buried in ruins. A player got a one-time use blob of neon blue goop that, when spread on the stump of a severed appendage, grows a bright blue replacement limb. You roll a d6, and on a 1, it's half the original size, on a 6, twice the original size. Any other result and it's normal. This is obviously meant to be a replacement for a lost arm or leg, with a little extra weirdness and risk to keep things interesting. So naturally, the PC cut off his own penis, smeared the goo on the stump, and grew a foot-long bright blue dick. A friend decided he wanted to run a campaign, having never really done one before. At one point we ended up in a gang hideout, with only male gang members. Because I had awesome charisma, I decided to bluff my way in. but was told it didn't work. I was the only female player, and character. The rest of the party, dudes, then claimed I was their prisoner and had me tied up. I was fine with that, but then the DM made really rapey comments as an attempt to make the gang members feel more threatening, and also had them insinuate child slave rape. Myself and the other party members were 100% not cool with that. His campaign and storytelling style turned out to be a pretty terrible fit for our group, and we quit playing with him not that long after. One of my friend's characters got body swapped into an attractive female human body, then got repeatedly failured into having sex and conceiving a deity's child. GM said, "Come on, it's medieval fantasy, rape's realistic." Friend silently resolved, "All right. You want me to play a rape victim? Fine. I'll play a rape victim," said next to nothing in character for the next 2 sessions, was really nervous around everyone else. Campaign fell apart. Fucking Paizo.